Life often forces us into impossible choices, testing the limits of loyalty, courage, and heart. Sometimes the people we think we serve or protect end up teaching us the most profound lessons about love, loss, and resilience. In a world divided by power, color, and legacy, the smallest acts of care can spark revolutions in both personal and societal worlds. Grief doesn't end. It reshapes us. It can break a soul while simultaneously forging strength we never knew existed. When tragedy and injustice collide with love and compassion, ordinary lives become arenas for battles of morality, courage, and trust. What we risk to save others defines who we truly are. Swelly Carter's hands shook violently as she pressed the screaming baby against her dark brown chest. His tiny face red, tears streaming uncontrollably. The Valentino mansion loomed around her, gleaming with wealth and power, but nothing mattered to the sound of his agony. She knew she wasn't supposed to be here, knew she was breaking every rule, yet the cries pierced her very soul, reminding her of the daughter she'd lost months ago. The air smelled of polished mahogany and expensive cologne, but it couldn't mask the desperation radiating from Marco, the infant in Dominic Valentino's arms. The most feared mob boss in Chicago, a tall black man with sharp features and inked forearms, looked utterly helpless, unable to calm his own child despite vast power and money. Swelly's own grief surged, a raw wound threatening to reopen. Her daughter Destiny had died just 3 months prior, leaving her body still producing milk for a child that no longer existed. She could feel the ache, the familiar pull of maternal instinct, intensifying as Marco's cries echoed through the nursery halls. The mansion's 3rd floor was off-limits, a private fortress where even the bravest staff feared to tread. But tonight, invisibility felt like cowardice. She moved silently up the stairs, her dark sneakers whispering against the plush carpet. Ignoring every warning, her body screamed. Every step brought memories of Destiny, mingling with the sound of Marco's suffering. Outside the ornate nursery door, 2 black bodyguards stood like statues, exhaustion etched into their faces. Mr. Valentino said no one enters, one whispered. Swelly met their eyes, her voice calm but firm. I can help him. The guards exchanged glances, unsure, then one slowly stepped aside. Inside, Marco writhed in his father's arms, his tiny body rigid, a sharp contrast to the plush, European-style nursery. The murals of Italian countryside seemed meaningless against the raw human need gripping the child. Dominic's normally commanding dark eyes softened in desperation as he tried again and again to calm him. I didn't call for anyone, Dominic muttered, voice strained. I know, sir, but Swelly's voice caught. I think I can help him. My daughter, she passed away. I can feed him. He needs it. Dominic's dark gaze widened, scanning her face for hesitation, for threat, for anything. You're suggesting you nurse my son? His tone was cautious, controlled, but vulnerability seeped through. Swelly nodded, heart hammering. Only if you allow it, sir. I can't listen to him suffer anymore. No baby should feel this pain. A tense silence filled the room. Marco whimpered softly, turning toward her instinctively seeking comfort. Dominic studied Swelly as if weighing her soul, measuring trust and courage. Slowly he stepped closer, the weight of his presence undeniable, every inch of his tall, dark frame radiating protective power. What's your name? He asked, voice low, almost intimate. Swelly Carter, sir. 2 weeks here. Her words trembled slightly, revealing more than she intended about her fragile hope and inner strength. And in 2 weeks you've never asked for anything, never even looked at me directly, but you'll risk everything to help my son. It's a baby, Swelly said simply. He's in pain. That's all that matters. Her dark eyes met his, unwavering, fierce with determination and the memory of her lost child. The tension in Dominic's room felt electric, a battle of will, grief, and moral code in the mansion of unimaginable power. He nodded slowly, a shadow of awe crossing his features. If you do this, I would be grateful. With careful hands, he placed Marco in Swelly's arms. The baby's weight settled against her chest like destiny fulfilled. Swelly felt something break and mend simultaneously, her body remembering the act it had mourned for months. Marco latched immediately, his tiny hands kneading gently against her chest, and for the first time in hours, a quiet descended on the room. The primal sound of hunger relieved, soothed both child and caregiver, binding them with an invisible thread stronger than blood alone. Dominic pulled a chair closer, sitting silently, watching in awe. His dark eyes glistened with unspoken gratitude and an almost frightening intensity. Swelly could sense the vulnerability beneath the mob boss persona, the man beneath the empire, and it mirrored her own grief in unspoken ways. You've lost a child? Dominic asked quietly, voiced low but demanding honesty. Swelly nodded. Destiny. She was 4 months old. My whole world. Tears streaked her face, hot and unstoppable. Dominic reached out, gently touching Marco's tiny hand. I understand, my wife. She died 6 months ago during childbirth. The weight of mutual grief created a fragile bridge of trust. Swelly's voice steadied as she explained her losses, the limited options, and the failures that had led her to this moment. Dominic listened intently, his imposing presence softened by the vulnerability of shared sorrow. Both of them bonded through pain and duty. Hours passed in quiet, punctuated only by the soft suckle of Marco and Swelly's whispered lullabies, fragments of gospel songs from her childhood echoing in the high-ceilinged nursery. Dominic remained, silent, observing, learning about resilience and compassion in ways money and power had never taught him. He began to reveal fragments of his life, two inheritance of the family empire at 25, the weight of violence he despised but was forced to master, the piano he played when sleep eluded him. They exchanged stories across the divide of grief. Their dark skin, a silent testament to shared experience and community in a city that had long tested both. Swelly shared her education, her thwarted teaching career, her fight to care for her mother, and her rage at systemic inequity that had indirectly cost Destiny her life. Dominic listened, absorbing every word, the room's tension mingling with empathy and understanding. "You sound angry," he observed. Swelly met his gaze squarely. "I am angry at the world that takes what's precious and leaves grief in return. Angry at a society that fails children, parents, and the innocent." The words hung heavy, a quiet rebellion against injustice. Dominic handed Marco back to her gently, acknowledging her grief without judgment. "You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be exhausted. You don't have to be strong all the time." Swelly's tears fell freely, her body finally allowing what her soul had needed. They stayed together through the night, sharing stories, fears, and hopes, their connection deepening with each passing moment. The mansion's cold luxury contrasted sharply with the warmth they created in that small room, where power, grief, and love intersected. By dawn, a fragile bond had formed, one built on trust, empathy, and a shared commitment to protect the life in her arms. Dominic's world was violent, structured, and dangerous, yet within this room a different set of rules applied: compassion, loyalty, and moral courage. Outside, Chicago stirred, unaware of the life-altering decisions taking place within the Valentino mansion. The city of glass and steel, wealth and shadows, bore witness silently to a story that would ripple far beyond the nursery walls. The first hours of Marco's recovery under Swelly's care marked the beginning of a new hierarchy, one defined not by fear, but by respect, shared grief, and a bond stronger than blood. Dominic's recognition of her courage shifted the power balance subtly, hinting at loyalty that transcended class and color. Swelly's dark hands, once instruments of cleaning and invisibility, now cradled life, power, and the promise of redemption. She understood the stakes: her life, her career, and the fragile trust of a man who could destroy her with a word. But the choice was clear. She would stay, she would protect Marco, she would navigate the treacherous waters of the Valentino world with courage informed by grief and compassion. In this moment she became indispensable, not just to a child, but to a man capable of extreme violence and unexpected tenderness. The mansion's corridors, usually echoing only footsteps and whispers of power, now contained laughter, cries, and murmured lullabies. Swelly's presence altered the rhythm, introducing vulnerability into a space accustomed to dominance and fear. Dominic watched her, seeing more than a caretaker. He saw resilience, courage, and empathy, qualities his empire often overlooked but which now defined the future of his family. He began to realize that power without moral guidance was hollow, and in Swelly's quiet insistence, he found balance. By late morning, Marco slept peacefully, and Swelly finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The mansion, once intimidating, felt slightly smaller, a place where love and loyalty could override fear. Her dark skin, her lost motherhood, and her courage had reshaped this palace's very essence. Swelly adjusted Marco in her arms, noticing how his tiny fingers clung to her shirt. The infant's soft coos filled the room, a stark contrast to the usual tension in the Valentino mansion. She glanced at Dominic, whose dark eyes were fixed on her, almost as if he was studying an equation he could not solve. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," Dominic admitted, voice low. Swelly raised an eyebrow, wary yet curious. "Different how?" she asked. His gaze softened, a rare vulnerability shining through the shadow of his feared persona. "You care without asking for anything in return. You don't pretend, and you don't run from pain," he said, his tone uncharacteristically sincere. Swelly felt a shiver. She recognized the weight behind his words. In his empire, honesty was a liability. The soft morning light filtered through the Italian curtains, casting golden hues on the dark wooden floors. Marco yawned and curled into her chest, and for the first time, the mansion felt alive with something beyond wealth and power. Dominic rose, pacing slowly. His tattoos seemed to shift under the light, a map of loyalty, violence, and secrets. "I've lived by fear, Swelly. Fear keeps men in line, protects what's ours. But you've taught me that fear isn't everything." Swelly met his gaze. "Steady, I've lived by grief. It teaches you patience, endurance, and how to fight when everything seems lost." The room seemed to contract around their words, a crucible of shared understanding. A sudden knock at the door startled them. One of the guards peeked in, whispering something urgent. Dominic's brow furrowed. "What now?" Swelly felt tension spike. Even in this fragile moment of peace, the outside world reminded them of danger lurking everywhere. "It's an alert, sir," the guard said. "Rival families spotted near the docks. Potential conflict. Dominic's jaw tightened. Stay here. Don't move. Swelly felt the weight of his concern. His instructions weren't just orders, they were shields. Hours later, the nursery remained calm, the sounds of Marco's gentle sleep contrasting sharply with the distant hum of city tension. Swelly hummed softly, rocking him, a lullaby inherited from her grandmother. Each note seemed to weave protection into the air. Dominic returned after dealing with the alerts, exhausted but composed. He leaned against the doorframe, dark eyes observing her. You handled him better than I could have, he admitted. Swelly felt a flush of pride mixed with relief. You handle a city empire. I handle a baby. Seems fair, she teased lightly. Dominic allowed a rare smirk, the lines of authority softening around his mouth. It was a small victory, but it meant something to both of them. Evening came, casting long shadows across the mansion. The nursery smelled of baby lotion and faint perfume, a sanctuary amidst the chaos. Dominic finally sat beside her, watching silently as Marco drifted between sleep and comfort. You know, Dominic said quietly, I've made enemies who would kill for less. And yet, I trust you with him. Swelly's heart skipped a beat. Why me? She asked, voice soft but steady. Because you remind me of what's worth protecting, he replied, eyes distant. Their conversation continued into the night. Dominic shared memories of his mother, a woman who had balanced fear with compassion, teaching him that loyalty wasn't just about power, it was about love and justice. In a family bound by blood and honor, Swelly nodded, understanding intimately. Her own losses had taught her that morality sometimes required defiance, courage, and persistence. And in this room, she found a reflection of that truth in Dominic's dark, watchful gaze. Suddenly, Marco stirred, fussing slightly. Swelly adjusted him, soothing his small cries. Dominic reached out instinctively, placing a protective hand on the baby's back. Their fingers touched briefly, a silent acknowledgement of partnership, trust, and shared responsibility. I don't usually allow anyone in here, Dominic admitted, voice low, but you're different. Swelly smiled faintly, warmth flooding her chest. Maybe some rules are meant to be broken, she replied softly. The city outside roared with live sirens, engines, and distant shouts, but inside the mansion, a fragile bubble of calm prevailed. The tension of Mafia rivalries and inherited violence seemed to dissipate in the presence of a crying child and to grieving adults. As days passed, Swelly's role expanded subtly. She learned the rhythms of Marco's sleep, the patterns of Dominic's empire, and the unspoken rules of loyalty and discretion. She became indispensable, not just for the baby, but as a moral compass in a world dominated by fear and control. Dominic observed her quietly, often standing in the shadows of the nursery, dark eyes absorbing every gesture, every gentle motion. You've changed this place, he admitted one evening, voice almost a whisper. Swelly paused, unsure how to respond. You've changed me too, she said finally. The night was deep, stars barely visible through the tinted windows. The mansion, usually echoing only commands and footsteps, now resonated with whispered stories, shared grief, and faint laughter. It was a delicate peace, but one neither dared break. One evening, a call came through Dominic's secure line. The rival families had made a move, nothing major, but a message that reminded him of the constant danger. He stepped away, leaving Swelly with Marco, yet the trust between them had deepened. You're not afraid? She asked quietly, watching him leave the room. Dominic's silhouette paused. Afraid doesn't accomplish anything but careful. Yes, always careful. He smiled faintly, a shadow of charm amidst darkness. As weeks turned into months, Swelly integrated into the Valentino household. Her presence became expected, necessary, and respected. The staff, initially wary of her boldness, grew to admire her courage and unwavering care for Marco. One afternoon, Dominic entered quietly, sitting beside her. You remind me of someone I lost, he admitted. Someone who cared for me without asking for loyalty or power. Swelly's heart clenched. I know loss, she said softly, but that doesn't mean we can't protect what's left. Marco's laughter filled the room as he played with a small wooden toy. Dominic watched, a rare smile touching his lips. In that moment, empire and violence seemed distant, replaced by the purity of new life and fragile trust. Swelly's hands, once instruments of silent work, now shaped comfort, care, and life itself. She understood the magnitude of her influence, not over wealth, but over hearts and decisions that could ripple far beyond this nursery. Dominic's empire was dangerous, complex, and unforgiving. Yet here, in a small sanctuary within the mansion, compassion had found its foothold, and a partnership forged in grief and courage flourished quietly. Night fell again, the city lights flickering like distant stars. Swelly rocked Marco gently, hums merging with the soft hum of the mansion. Dominic's presence was steady, watching over them, protector and observer, a man softened by shared pain and newfound understanding. Dominic poured himself a drink in the dimly lit kitchen, the amber liquid catching the glow of the hanging lamp. He took a long sip, thinking of Swelly and the unusual calm she brought into his chaotic life. Swelly peeked in from the nursery doorway, smiling faintly. Still counting enemies, she teased. Dominic shook his head. the ghost of a grin appearing. No, just recalibrating. You taught me that some battles aren't worth the cost. The baby gurgled, grabbing at the edge of a soft blanket. Swelly picked him up, cradling him close. Some lessons come early, she said quietly, watching Dominic. You just have to be willing to learn. Dominic leaned against the counter, dark eyes fixed on her. And what lesson are you teaching me now? Swelly's smile softened. That trust isn't weakness, it's survival. The tension in the mansion eased slightly, though the city outside never slept. Whispers of rival movements reached them through the staff, but Dominic's attention was increasingly focused on the fragile balance within these walls. One evening, a letter arrived unmarked and unsigned. Dominic read it carefully, his expression unreadable. Swelly noticed the subtle clenching of his jaw, a silent storm beneath the surface. You'll have to deal with them, she said softly, placing Marco on the changing table. Dominic nodded, appreciative of her calm, composed presence. And you'll stay here. Safe. Nightfall brought quiet, and for the first time in months, the mansion seemed like a home rather than a fortress. Marco slept soundly, and Swelly's humming filled the empty spaces. Dominic lingered, reluctant to leave. You ever think about leaving all this behind? Swelly asked, eyes on the baby. Dominic shook his head slowly. This is my life. But sometimes, I wonder what peace would feel like. Her hand brushed his, almost accidental, yet deliberate enough to convey understanding. Peace doesn't come from absence of danger, she said. It comes from finding something worth protecting, no matter the cost. Dominic's dark eyes softened. You make me want to believe in that, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Swelly smiled faintly, unsure whether to take that as a confession or a warning. A sudden crash from the mansion's upper floor startled them. Dominic's instincts kicked in instantly. Stay here, he commanded, but Swelly held Marco closer, unafraid. The intruder was minor, a careless thug testing boundaries, but Dominic handled him with swift efficiency. Swelly watched, heart pounding, yet strangely calm. She had learned to read his moves, his thought patterns. Are you scared? Dominic asked quietly once the situation was resolved. Swelly shook her head. Not with you here. Dominic gave a rare, unguarded smile. Good fear clouds judgment. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion gradually transformed. Staff began to talk less and observe more, noting how Dominic's aura had softened subtly in Swelly's presence, how Marco's laughter filled corners that had once echoed only orders. One afternoon, Swelly found Dominic staring out at the docks, the sunset casting a golden haze over the water. Memories? She asked softly. Dominic didn't answer immediately. Regret mostly, he said finally, tone low. She placed a hand on his shoulder. We can't change the past, but we can shape what comes next. Dominic exhaled slowly, the weight of his empire pressing against her quiet wisdom. Marco toddled over, holding a small toy gun, imitating his father. Dominic chuckled, a deep, rare sound that filled the room. Swelly laughed softly, noting how the child's innocence could thaw even the coldest hearts. Evening dinners became small rituals. Swelly cooked, Dominic offered subtle guidance, and Marco provided the chaos that made the mansion feel like a family home rather than a stronghold of fear. Yet the outside world remained relentless. Rival families tested Dominic's resolve, and occasional threats reminded them both that peace was temporary, fragile, and often expensive. One night, a threatening call came. Dominic's fingers tightened around the phone. Swelly watched silently, ready to react if necessary. We'll handle it, he said calmly, though his knuckles whitened. Together, she added, meeting his gaze. Marco stirred, sensing the tension. Swelly soothed him, murmuring soft words. Dominic's watchful eyes softened as he saw her patience, her courage a stark contrast to the cold, calculating world he navigated daily. Weeks passed and Dominic began confiding small truths, tales of loyalty, betrayal, and impossible choices. Swelly listened, absorbing each story without judgment. You've carried so much, she whispered one night. And yet, you still protect. Dominic's gaze lingered on her, a silent acknowledgement of their unspoken bond. Protecting keeps me human, he admitted quietly. And you remind me of what it means to be more than just feared. The nursery became a haven of strategy and care, a place where even the most ruthless decisions were softened by laughter and love. Dominic and Swelly found a rhythm. He provided security, she provided heart. One morning, Marco stumbled into the hallway, holding a drawing he had made. Daddy, Mummy, he said proudly. Dominic bent down, taking the paper, a crude sketch, but unmistakable. A small family, smiling together. Swelly's eyes welled up. It's perfect, she whispered. Dominic nodded silently. The weight of his empire momentarily lifted, replaced by the simple truth in a child's art. As winter approached, the mansion's interiors grew warmer, the outside world colder. Dominic arranged guards strategically, yet within they cultivated an atmosphere of safety and care, a rare luxury in a life defined by threats. Swelly discovered hidden corners of the mansion once forgotten, a library filled with old letters, a balcony overlooking the city, a small fountain in the courtyard. She brought life to spaces Dominic had abandoned to shadows. He watched her work quietly, impressed by her subtle influence. You see things differently, He observed one evening. Swelly smiled faintly. I see what could be, not just what is. Spring arrived slowly, painting the city in muted pastels. Dominic found himself less tethered to old grudges, his thoughts often wandering to the future he could build with Swelly and Marco. Swelly had taken to gardening on the balcony, small pots of herbs and flowers. Dominic observed her quietly, admiring the patience and care she poured into each seed. It was foreign, almost magical, to see her transform even a small corner of the mansion. Marco toddled around, his laughter echoing through the halls, a sound Dominic realized he had almost forgotten in the chaos of power and violence. He felt a warmth that had nothing to do with empire or fear. One afternoon, a minor skirmish erupted in the docks district, a test from a rival faction. Dominic handled it with precise efficiency, his reputation intact, yet his thoughts remained with his little family rather than the streets he controlled. Swelly approached later, holding Marco's hand. You were impressive, she said softly. Dominic shook his head with a faint smile. It's just business. Family is something entirely different. They shared a quiet dinner, the three of them, a rare moment of peace. Dominic caught himself studying Swelly, appreciating the subtle lines of her face in the warm lamplight, the gentle strength in her gestures. Night fell, and Dominic found himself staring at the skyline, contemplating what he had survived and what he still wished to protect. Swelly joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. It's not the skyline that matters, she said. It's who stands beside you. Marco tugged at Dominic's hand, asking to be lifted. Dominic obliged, feeling the small weight of his son, a weight far sweeter than any burden he carried from the streets. Months passed, and the mansion transformed further, from fortress to home. Staff spoke of Dominic differently now, noting a gentler demeanor, a man still dangerous yet capable of tenderness. One evening, an old adversary requested a meeting. Dominic agreed. Cautiously, Swelly stayed behind, preparing Marco for bed. Dominic knew the streets had their rules, and trust was never freely given. The meeting was tense but brief. Dominic displayed his control without cruelty, asserting dominance while keeping violence to a minimum. The adversary left with respect, and Dominic returned to his home feeling lighter. Swelly greeted him quietly. Everything went well, she asked. Dominic nodded. Better than expected. But home? This is where I belong. Winter approached again, the city chilled and unforgiving. Within the mansion, warm lights, soft blankets, and quiet routines contrasted sharply with the world outside. Dominic learned to embrace these moments, small victories in a life defined by larger battles. He began telling Marco stories of loyalty, courage, and honor, not the violence of his past, but the principles he hoped his son would carry forward. Swelly listened, adding her own gentle lessons, guiding them both toward a future not dictated by fear. One evening, Dominic found himself in the nursery alone, watching Marco sleep. Swelly entered silently, placing a hand on his shoulder. You've done enough for the streets, she said. Now, do enough for us. Dominic's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. I'm learning, he admitted, voice low. Swelly nodded, understanding more than words could convey. Spring turned to summer, and the mansion thrived with life. Marco ran freely, laughter echoing off walls, while Dominic and Swelly navigated parenthood and power with a careful balance. Threats came, as always, but Dominic's priorities had shifted. The city's power plays mattered less than the safety of his family, the laughter of his son, and the quiet moments of connection with Swelly. One quiet night, they sat together on the balcony, Marco asleep in a nearby crib. Dominic held Swelly's hand, watching the stars glimmer above the city. I used to think survival was everything, he said. Now I see. Love is the true victory. Swelly leaned against him, her voice soft. And family is worth every risk. Dominic nodded, feeling the weight of past battles lighten with her words, a future filled with possibilities stretching beyond fear and violence. In the heart of the mansion, the empire and the family coexisted, a delicate balance, maintained by loyalty, courage, and love. Dominic finally allowed himself to hope, to dream beyond the streets, beyond the shadows. Marco stirred, sensing the quiet triumph of the moment. Dominic lifted him, spinning him lightly. Laughter filled the balcony, the night, and, for the first time, Dominic's heart felt at home. Swelly smiled, her eyes reflecting both pride and relief. This is it, she whispered. The life you were always meant to fight for. Dominic held them both, looking out over the city with clear eyes. The battles would come, as they always did, but inside these walls, the war was over. Here there was only family, love, and the fragile but undeniable peace they had fought to create. And as dawn broke, painting the mansion in gold, Dominic realized that for the first time he was truly free, not from enemies, not from power, but from the emptiness that had once defined him.